Hey, I'm Ed Bolian, and welcome to my personal channel. I hope that you've enjoyed my stories on VinWiki, but I wanted to use this space to talk a little bit more deeply about some of my favorite things about the cars that I love. And obviously, I love cars with crazy stories in their past. And of all the cars that I've seen, sold, heard about, honestly, the car with the craziest backstory and my personal favorite is my Grigio Telesto Lamborghini Murcielago LP640, the manual car that I owned before my current one. I think it's just the greatest story of all time. But of course, when we think about cars with a bad history, we also think about insurance. And when you think about insurance, I want you to think about Policy Genius. They're the sponsor of this video, and they allow you to search across all the major and best carriers to get the best insurance at the best price. For home, for auto, to bundle, any of your insurance needs, they can help with. They do all the shopping for you. They make it very easy to switch. And every time your policy is up for renewal, they check them all again to make sure that you're getting the best help. They've helped over 30 million people. And when people bundle their home and auto coverage, they save an average of over $1,100. So please be sure to check them out at the link in the description below and thank them so much for their support of my channel, of VinWiki, and of all the things that we do. But I've told the story of this gray LP640 in different pieces throughout different videos over the years on VinWiki, but I have never been able to kind of unify its story into a single video. And I was really thinking about this car a lot lately. And so this is the story of that car. Back in 2014, I bought a manual transmission LP640. I'd always loved the cars. I'd tried to buy several, but the stars finally aligned and I bought a 2008 Verda Ithaca LP640 coupe. It was one of 20 manual LP640 coupes, and at the time, the market really hadn't appreciated that. They knew that manual cars were kind of starting to go up, but I didn't really have to pay that much more for a manual car than I had paid for my prior two E-Gear LP640s. But I found the perfect car and I got it bought. And honestly, it was the nicest one probably on earth. It had about 4,000 miles, every single option except ceramic brakes that you could get in 2008. Most of the manual cars are 2007s, and I was just elated. I started driving the car as much as I possibly could, but to be quite honest, it was so nice and had such low miles, I honestly felt a little bit guilty, which is something I absolutely hate to have associated with putting miles on cars. But later in the next year, in 2015, I left Motor Cars of Georgia, Lamborghini Atlanta, to just figure out what was going to be next. I really didn't know what the next step was going to be for me personally in my career. I didn't know what VinWiki was or even really have the idea, but I was in the habit of meeting with fellow entrepreneurs, and obviously VinWiki is what we started. We launched the app in the middle of 2016. But from November of 2015 until the first time I made any money with VinWiki or on YouTube, it was about 2 years to the day. And you can imagine that having this gigantic car payment during that window of time was pretty stressful for me and my wife. So we were just bleeding through savings and hoping that at some point some good opportunity would come along. But it was a very valuable time in my life, and I absolutely loved the car. But again, there was some guilt associated with it. And as I started to see the values increase and different people asking if they could buy my car, seeing other ones sell at great numbers, and my documentation of the empirical rarity of these cars had really caused them all to surge in value. And so I had made a list of all the VINs of all the manual LP640s just on my personal website, and RM had referenced that in some auctions. It had really made the rounds, links in forums and things like that. People were excited about manual LP640s. And I would periodically hear about a new one. There was no factory database that I could access to figure out where they all were, or even what they all were. And so occasionally people would send me a message saying, hey, I have this one. And later in 2014, or maybe even early in 2015, I got a message from someone saying that they owned VIN 2227. And he said it had kind of a weird past, but he had gotten a good deal on it. And he was kind of surprised that it wasn't already on my list. And at that point, I knew enough about the VINs of manual LP640s in the US to reconstruct them from just that last four of the VIN. So the build number out of 4,099 was 2227, but the VIN would have begun ZHWBU 37M, a check digit 7LA0, and then those four numbers to be a US 07 manual LP640 coupe. And so I kept going through there, and the only thing I had to figure out was the check digit, which could be 0 through 9 or X. And I couldn't make it mathematically validate because US VINs use a check digit like a credit card number to mathematically be checkable pretty much immediately. It's what we do in the VinWiki app. And so I couldn't make this one work. And so I asked him, I said, is there something weird about the history of this car? Or are you sure that's the VIN? He said, yeah, but I think it's a Canadian car. And I heard that it had been like fraudulently reported stolen. So once I got the VIN, I could pull the Carfax and see what other information was out there. And yeah, the car had been reported stolen and reported as being damaged, but neither of those really had that much information. It's one of the reasons we ended up starting VinWiki, was because a lot of times Carfax information leaves a lot to be desired. And so I always kind of had that car in the back of my mind. I told him, if you ever want to sell it, I'll be happy to help you place it. And who knows, maybe one day I'll want to buy it myself. And so as I was bleeding through my savings, continuing to make my huge payment on the green LP640, I kind of kept thinking about that car. And I was like, as these things go up in value, the worst example, which this one was, might not go up as much. I said, I wonder if I could sell mine and use the profit to buy this car. I'd paid $215,000. I ended up selling the car for $350,000, $135,000 profit. And this guy had agreed to take $140,000 for the car. And so I planned to fly out to Las Vegas, check the car out, get a PPI done, and if so, I'm gonna green light the dealer that I had just sold the Verde Ithaca car to wire him the money so that I could buy it. We end up getting out there. It's a little rougher around the edges than I'd imagined, and so I talk him down. I buy the car for $120,000. So I'm $15,000 to the good, and I've got my dream car, a manual LP640, that I effectively own for free. It was the first time I'd ever owned an exotic car without a loan attached to it. It was an awesome experience. So I road tripped the car home after Lamborghini Las Vegas, fixed a few things, the door ding, the seatbelt ding, recharged the air conditioning, did an alignment. It was a really rough car. It needed a lot, and in fact, over the next couple of months, I spent about $30,000 redoing some of the body work that had been done before, primarily on the left quarter panel. And so we go through the car, we get it to be a really, really nice driver. I mean, it's never gonna be a perfect car, but it's the kind of car that I really like to own. And I thought it was interesting to have this fraudulently reported, previously crashed car. And over time, as I started posting on Instagram and places that I had the car and was driving it, people started to tell me a little bit more about the car. In fact, someone sent me a news article of the car having been crashed and abandoned on a Canadian highway. And I'm like, holy cow, look at that. And I mean, it was properly crashed. One of the wheels was kind of folded under, and it was definitely damaged. The doors were open, and the car was just sitting there, flashers on, in the middle of the highway. And so I owned the car for a little while, and eventually a guy who had crashed and totaled his 2004 manual Murcielago asked if he could buy it, and he made me an offer that was honestly about $100,000 profit, and it was something I just couldn't say no to. At that time, again, VinWiki had not gotten anywhere to the point of like income replacement with respect to working at the dealership. I needed to take wins like that. And in fact, at the same time, my current 430 Scuderia, the gray over red car, was for sale at McLaren Beverly Hills. And I made an offer to buy that car thinking, hey, this will be something new. But very soon after the car left, I realized I really can't be without it. And so I ended up buying a black US higher mileage but no accident or theft history LP640 manual car, and buying it for less than I had just sold mine, making a little bit of money and kind of owning a nicer one, improving your position in the car, as Eric from EAG would say. And so I got that one. It needed a lot of paint work. Obviously, we painted it Verde Draco, and I absolutely love that car. And honestly, I can't imagine being without it. However, I still like the previous one's backstory so much better that the other day I was really thinking about, I wonder if I could get him to give me some money and get that one back or something. I don't know what the answer is, but I just love the story of this car. And not just because of what I knew at that point, but after I released the story on the VinWiki channel of how I got my dream Lamborghini for free, I was contacted by a guy through email, and he said, do you want to know the real story behind your gray LP640? And I said, of course, absolutely. And he said, well, why don't you call me through WhatsApp? And so he was not in the US at the time, and I don't even think he was in Canada. But we talked on WhatsApp, and he said, well, I am the person who crashed your car. This was back in 2009. He said at the time I was 15 years old, and I had gotten this girl pregnant, and her dad ran a car dealership in Canada. And he actually didn't mean to be running a car dealership. It was just the best way for him to ship drugs across the border into the US. So, being betrothed to his daughter, this guy went to work for the father at the car dealership and talked at length about the measures they would take to stuff drugs everywhere in the seats and the frame rails. everywhere they could put drugs so that they could sell them at auctions. They could come into the US in a way that looked semi-legitimate, and that was the way they were selling drugs. He went on to say that the reason that his father-in-law was a car dealer in Canada was that he had been kicked out of Iran because he was a terrorist. He had been blowing up bazaars, and they had kicked him out of the country, and Canada had welcomed him in. And so he talked a little bit more about what it was like to work at the dealership, that he'd met Drake, that Drake had hit on his wife, girlfriend, whatever, baby mama, and everything had kind of worked out. But I was like, well, tell me about the accident. He said, well, one night we were working at the dealership, and the father-in-law said, we've got to get this car out of the showroom. Again, it was about 2009. The car was not selling very well. That was a really weak point in the US or North American exotic car economy. Everything's depreciating, luxury assets more so than others. And so they were having a hard time selling the car, but the FBI of Canada, I guess the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, were somehow investigating the dealership, obviously about the suspicions of other activities, and so they wanted to get this Lamborghini that they were selling on consignment out of the showroom. That night, apparently, both of them had been drinking, and so they went out, and the father-in-law is driving the car. He apparently decides that he's had too much to drink, and so he asked the 15-year-old to drive the car, and it takes him all of a couple of miles to spin the car out on the highway, put the rear quarter into the median, and it's crashed and won't start. Obviously, we see the wheel is bent, and it's not going to go anywhere under its own power. The father-in-law, thinking on his feet, decides that getting this drunk 15-year-old kid arrested for driving and crashing this car that isn't really even theirs and may not be properly insured is probably not going to be the best path. And so they decide that the best thing to do is get out, take the dealer tag off, and flee into the bushes and run a couple of miles until they can hail a cab. And so they go into work the next day. Oh my goodness, the Lamborghini has been stolen, and they call their insurance, call the police. I'd previously heard that a drunk dealer had crashed the car and fraudulently reported it stolen. So this satisfied that. I didn't know that the dealer's 15-year-old shotgun wedding son-in-law had done it, but I was just fascinated by it. And so obviously the insurance didn't pay. The car wasn't ever really misplaced or stolen. It just went to impound. And they tried, in fact, I believe, to sell it at a Copart auction in Canada. There's some pictures of the car on Copart that I think I found on Wrecked Exotics or something like that. But I don't believe it's sold there because the kid who's talking to me, who's now a little bit more grown up, says that they decided then to ship the car to Lebanon. Now, this was interesting because not long after I'd sold the car and started posting about it on VinWiki, I saw one of our users find a shipping manifest of the car going to Beirut. And I was like, why on earth would that be? Maybe it's just a misprint. There was nothing else in the car's history that made that seem to make sense. But in fact, he confirmed, no, it did. They thought they could sell the car better in Lebanon, and I believe that's where the car had been repaired. There were like 7 layers of Bondo and paint and primer, and it was an absolute mess that we had to get all the way down. My body shop, guys, I did not do any of this sand work, but we got the car back together and sourced a bunch of new parts and ended up making it, again, quite a nice driver. And so I think I put, I don't know, 8,000 miles on the car during the time that I owned it, and then I sold it to a man in the Pacific Northwest that has several Lamborghinis, and he certainly seems to be enjoying it. He has modified it a lot. But, you know, hearing this crazy story about the car going to Lebanon and then eventually coming back into the US with a bonded title, and that's why it wasn't branded as salvage or theft recovery or anything like that, that it ended up with the defense contractor that I bought it from out of Las Vegas. And you know, it was just such a great way to describe why you got a good deal on your favorite car. And so again, to me, it's just the ultimate backstory that a car could ever have. In fact, when I sold my 2007 Mercedes S65 AMG to Patrick Adair of Patrick Adair Designs, he's got an amazing ring making channel, jewelry making channel on YouTube, and does a lot of interesting car work with Stradman and Post Malone and a lot of the Salt Lake City guys. And so he bought my car after seeing that I was interested in selling the S-Class on Instagram. And so while he was here, I grabbed one of the wheels that had been cracked. Actually, both of the rear wheels had cracks in them, one of them there in the background, but I gave him the other one and he made it into a series of rings, which was just really cool because, you know, I think we ended up saying it's a car story with a ring to it, because the ability to say, oh, this ring that I'm wearing actually has a lot more of a story to it than you'd ever imagine, and being able to share that story without ever having to own the car just seemed like an awful lot of fun, and they sold out rather immediately. So he and I are going to do some more collaborations through the VinWiki channel throughout the year, but absolutely my favorite car. Backstory, most people would say it's terrible, but to me it would just enrich the ownership. So again, thank you so much for watching. Please subscribe if you'd like to see more content here on my personal channel. Thank you so much to Policy Genius for sponsoring this video and a few more that we've got in the pipeline coming up. Be sure to check them out at the link in the description below and see if you can get a better deal on your home insurance, your auto insurance, or any other insurance products that you need, and they'll make sure that every time it renews, you continue to get the best deal possible. Thanks so much and have a great day.